Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we're doing this really fun video where we're going to go over my entire NYRB collection. I've seen other booktubers do this on their channels and I thought, ooh, I can't wait to share with you guys all the NYRB books that I have. So I've pulled them all from my shelves. I have about 21. And I'm going to split them up into the books I've already read and the books on my TBR. So we start with the books I've already read. I have my mini Magda Szabo collection. If you're not familiar with her, she's a Hungarian author and she's just an excellent storyteller and I love her books, although they're all completely different. The first one is The Door, which has a very memorable opening chapter that talks about a nightmare that she had, that there was a knock on the door and she was trying to open the door. And so that's where that title comes from. But it's the story of this woman who's a writer and then she hires this woman, Emerence, to be her housekeeper. And then it's the story of that whole relationship between the housekeeper and the family. The housekeeper has a lot of idiosyncrasies and she likes things a certain way, otherwise she gets offended, and it gets a little complicated, and there's sort of a strange codependent bond that forms between the two women. And towards the end, the housekeeper's health starts to decline and all sorts of drama ensues. But for some reason, I really like this book. It just felt like an exploration of human dignity and aging. So that's The Door. And then we have Abigail, which is my personal favorite by her. This is the story of this young teenage girl. It's the Second World War in Hungary. The girl's father has decided that she'll be safer if she attends a boarding school that's more out in the country versus staying in the city, because there's a lot of dangerous situations in the city. So she ends up attending this boarding school and there's all sorts of new things for her to get used to and trying to make new friends. And then halfway through it kind of turns into a little bit of a mystery / adventure where strange, unexplainable things are happening. So it becomes a little bit of an action-packed story towards the end, but I loved it. It's called Abigail. And then the other one that I've read by Magda Szabo is Isa's Ballad. So it's the story of Isa and her aging mother. In the first chapter, the dad is dying, and so the question arises, what's going to happen to the mom now that she's a widow, etc. So it's a really detailed exploration of the mother-daughter bond and how things start to get reversed, because then the daughter is the one who wants to take care of the mother. But then it starts to feel like there's some kind of abysmal gap between the two. Like the daughter doesn't quite understand that her mom has her own feelings and wishes for some form of independence. And the mother is not quite able to express her mixed emotions because she's very grateful to the daughter for stepping in and becoming more involved in her life. But at the same time, she feels like she's lost her independence and her connection to what she's familiar with. So it's very bittersweet, but I enjoyed this one too, Isa's Ballad. Then we have 3 Summers by Margarita Liberacki. Actually, this one might have my favorite cover of all the books. Just love this artwork. So this is a Greek author who talks about 3 sisters growing up in Greece on the outskirts of Athens. And it talks about how they each had their own personalities that were completely different. The older one is very headstrong and will say, no, I don't want this, etc. And then the second one is a little bit more withdrawn. She's a little bit more of an introvert. And then the third one is the narrator, who's trying to maintain the connection with her two sisters throughout all of life's events and ups and downs. And at one point, there's also a little bit of a mystery in this one because it seems like the mother has some secrets and doesn't want her daughters to know. And so the younger daughter is trying to elucidate what's going on with that. But I just loved all the descriptions of their life in Greece and their connection to nature and their connection to each other as sisters, and how whenever something happens to one of them, they all pull together and they all provide a source of moral support for each other. I just thought this book was beautifully written. I had not heard of this author before, but I was blown away by this one. So highly recommend this one, 3 Summers. Then we have A View of the Harbour by Elizabeth Taylor. I have to say, I initially bought this just because of the cover. I just love that blue tint, but ended up loving this one. Elizabeth Taylor has been a real discovery for me. In this book, it's like a description of a small town that's right on a harbor. And so what she does is she basically describes how the houses look on the outside facing the harbor, and then little by little you go into each home and figure out who's living there and what's happening and how are these people related to each other. And each family and each situation is completely unique. There's one with a woman who recently lost her husband, so she's dealing with feelings of loneliness and not too sure how to adjust to her new reality. Then you have another one where it's a woman who's a writer, so she's always on her typewriter and then trying to juggle work and taking care of the children. Then you have another one where it's a woman who's an invalid. She's mostly home, not really mobile, and she depends a lot on her 2 grown daughters. So there's this weird power dynamic where she tries to shame them if they try to become too independent because she really depends on them so heavily. But this was my first book by Elizabeth Taylor, and this made me discover the way that she describes these small details of daily life that give you this very nuanced portrayal of each character so that you really have a good idea of who they are and what they're willing to sacrifice and what they're willing to do. This felt very real. It felt like the characters are truly complex, just like they are in real life, which is what I like about her. So I've read Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont since I read this one, and I'm planning to read more by Elizabeth Taylor, but I love this one, A View of the Harbour. The next one is Machines in the Head by Anna Kavan. And I actually have a video where I read you an entire short story from this collection. The story that I read you is about a woman in a psychiatric asylum. Anna Kavan is a very gifted writer. Some of these stories just left me very impressed with her prose. I think the ones that I like the most are from what's called Asylum Peace, which are all about mental health, and Machines in the Head, which is the title of the book, is actually the title of one of those stories. I don't recommend the one called The Gannets because it involves some horror elements involving children, so it's a little bit disturbing. But everything else I would recommend. This is very well written, and it has made me want to discover some more by this author, Anna Kavan. Now I have 2 by Tove Jansson. So Tove Jansson Jansson, in case you're not familiar, she's an author who was born in Finland, but she was part of a Swedish minority within Finland. So she wrote in Swedish, and these books have been translated into English. This one, the summer book, is about a little girl who spends the summer with her grandmother. Her mom has passed away. The dad is also a part of the picture, but for some reason she has most of her interactions with the grandmother, and they have all their little traditions on this island where they spend the summer, and it's just beautifully written. I really like this one, the summer book. And then you have this one, The True Deceiver. And I love this cover. I have this secret wish of doing a reenactment of this cover with my dog. So The True Deceiver is the story of a young woman who somehow figures out a way to move in with this other lady who has her own house, but she's not being completely straightforward about her motives for moving there, which is why it's called The True Deceiver. But there's a lot of scenes of small village life with the snow, lots of wintry scenes. So this one is perfect to read like in January or February on a cold night. And the thing with Tove Jansson is she's not in your face trying to tell you, oh, this person is good or this person is bad. It's more about all these little subtle shifts and these subtle moments. And then the reader has to kind of make up their mind about how they feel about these characters. But it's more about the subtleties, I would say. So that's my other Tove Jansson. Now there's a few more that I've read. So this one you won't recognize the cover because I covered it with a Cezanne painting. But this is Stoner by John Williams. This one is the story of a man's life from beginning to end. It just spans his entire life. So in the beginning, he grows up in a family where the parents are farmers, and so they're kind of expecting him to take over the farm. And so what he does is he signs up to go to university, and supposedly he's going to take up farming, but he ends up falling in love with literature and deciding to become a literature professor instead. So there's a lot of mixed emotions, fear of what his parents are going to think, because they were assuming he was going to take over the farm. So then the book goes into everything that happens to him. His marriage, his career, all the different ups and downs. But I think what makes this book special is that the way certain scenes are described, it feels like the author, John Williams, has been able to verbalize all these very subtle emotions that happen at certain key moments of life that would be difficult to put into words. And somehow he's found a way to verbalize this. So I think that's what makes this book very special. Let me know if you've read this one and what you thought, okay? Then we have Great Granny Webster by Carolyn Blackwood. This is the story of a young girl who goes to stay with her great-grandmother. And it's a very short story, but it's just very well written. And it describes how the great-grandmother was very set in her ways, and the house felt very gloomy. But this story made me discover this author, and now I want to read more by her because she's an excellent writer. Not much really happened, and yet she had my attention. So this is Carolyn Blackwood. Then we have The Juniper Tree by Barbara Comyns. This is a book that could be described as a dark fairy tale. Ultimately, I don't think I could recommend it to everybody because I decided not to read any blurbs or anything, so I went in without knowing anything about this book. And now I kind of wish I did, because even though she's a great storyteller and this was objectively an excellent book, I think probably because I kind of have a sensitivity when it comes to cruelty to animals and children. So perhaps that would have been important for me to be warned about this. but I do want to read different books by Barbara Comyns. I've bought a couple by her. I think The House of Dolls might be my next one that I read by her. If you've read her before and you have any recommendations, let me know in the comments, okay? And the final book that I've read from my NYRB pile is The Gate by Natsume Soseki. So this is a story about an aging couple in Japan. And it's one of those books where nothing much happens throughout the book. It just goes through their daily routines and what's going on in the neighborhood and things like that. But somehow it's just quietly heartbreaking because the husband is kind of reminiscing about the early years. So there's the fact that they married without the consent of the families, and then they were trying to have children and somehow couldn't have children. So you have all these little heartbreaking moments throughout their lives that they kind of reminisce over as they're getting older. But I just really like the writing style. It's just one of those books that'll make you start reflecting on what does it all mean, and whatever difficulties life puts in your way, what do you do with that? So I'm intrigued. I would like to read more by this author, Natsume Soseki. And I think the next one I read by him might be something called Kokoro. Okay, so those are the ones that I've already read. Now we're going to talk about the ones that are on my TBR. I have this other Magda Szabo book, Katalin Street, which is supposed to be about 3 families in Budapest whose lives are intertwined. So I'm planning to read this one this summer. Then I just got The Post Office Girl by Zweig. I don't know how to pronounce his name. This is an author that a lot of people have been recommending. I was considering starting with Chess Story, but I ended up picking The Post Office Girl. Please let me know in the comments if you agree with that choice, and hopefully you can give me some advice as to what to read next by this author, okay? Then there's a trilogy, but I only have 2 of them. This is The Book of Blam and Kapo by Alexandra Tisma. This is a story about Eastern Europe in the aftermath of the war, and how the people who survived, even though they made it out of the war alive, there's so much trauma that it's almost like their souls have been pulled out of them. So I just have to brace myself to read this because apparently it's very bleak. And I also have to get the middle one because I only have the first and the third. Then there's The Landbreakers by John Ehle, and I know nothing about this book, but I kind of want to go in without knowing anything. I just bought it because of the cover, really. So hopefully I'll like it. Then we have a collection of essays by Robert Walser called Little Snow Landscape. I just, once again, bought this because of the cover. And I've never read this author before, but I think when I'm in the mood for something snowy, I'm definitely going to read this one. Now we have Irretrievable by Theodore Fontane. Theodore Fontane is a 19th century German writer. The book that I've read by him so far is called Effie Briest, which I highly, highly recommend. So I can't wait to read something else by him. So I got this one, Irretrievable. And then we have Valentino and Sagittarius. Isn't this cover amazing? This is by Natalia Ginzburg. Natalia Ginzburg is an Italian author that I absolutely love. Last year, one of her books, The Dry Heart, made it to my top 10 favorite books of the year. And this year, I'm currently reading Family and Borghesia, and I'm planning to read this one in September. And then finally, we have Ghosts by Edith Wharton. I'm a huge Edith Wharton fan. I've read The House of Mirth, The Age of Innocence, Ethan Frome, and Summer so far. And so this one is supposedly a collection of spooky short stories. And so I was thinking maybe around Halloween would be a good time to pick this one up. So this is my last NYRB book on my pile. So let me know in the comments which of these NYRB books you've read and which NYRB books you own and you would recommend. Till next time, happy reading!